I hand over to Wayne, who will speak to us about just his experience of good governance and what we need to do with the heart rather than with our heads and our hands. Wayne.
Thank you so much, Steve, and good evening, everyone. Or my Australian accent isn't too strong for you. Um, I have a particular love for India, and Steve and the other brothers know that I often say that most of my formation received as a human being and in my spiritual journey and my life journey has been basically down to my wonderful experiences of your beautiful land. And I look forward to coming back there very, very soon. Um, as Steve mentioned, I've had a privileged opportunity to be involved in Edmund Rice education and Edmund Rice mission more broadly over many years now. And in recent years, I've been traveling around to the places in the world where Edmund Rice schools exist. And there are 24 different countries around the world. It's quite a big network of, well over 250 schools. And I find in the schools, working with the teachers, governors, working with people who are involved in mission, working with the young people, that we have this incredibly strong and palpable uniform vision of what our work should be if we go back to the original inspiration of Edmund Rice. And what I'd like to basically just present to you in my short time this afternoon is a sense of how we come to a vision for what we want to do, our mission, our work, what we do, what can inspire us, what are some of the core priorities that should inspire us as leaders, as governors, as people involved in working in the spirit of Edmund Rice. And then towards the end, I'd like to basically tie it together with a few of my comments and reflections on governance, some of the dangers that I feel exist on the horizon as our schools and our works move into a more strong and rigorous governance framework outside the work of the Christian Brothers. It brings great professionalism, but it also brings some significant dangers, and I'd like to perhaps reflect on those. The Christian Brothers formally understand mission as basically revolving around three key pillars. You've probably heard them before: presence, liberation, and compassion. And look, our sense of physical presence in mission is so important. And that's what impresses me so much about the work of Pratyek and other advocacy groups, groups around the world that work to support the plight of the marginalized. Our sense of presence, being with the people, brings a sense of dignity and hope to those people whom we serve. A belief that their lives do matter and that they are persons of worth. So our physical presence is very, very important. But I think our call to presence can also describe the consciousness that moves us in the mission that we embrace. And that consciousness has its roots in the sense that all of creation has its source in the divine. There exists a spark of divinity in each one of us, and we are not separate from God, and we're not separate from each other. Now, if we can accept that, and I think we all can, because it's a core foundation of all of our different great faith traditions. Since we share this same divine essence, we're all brothers and sisters. We're all sons and daughters of the divine. In this way of love, self and the other are one. When Jesus, who inspires a lot of the work of Edmund Rice, said, "Love your neighbour as yourselves," he probably could have said, "Love your neighbour," because he or she is yourself. Edmund Rice people believe that all human beings are tied together with a single garment of humanity. What humanizes you humanizes me. What dehumanizes you dehumanizes me. I can never be all that I'm called to be in my life unless you have the opportunity to experience fullness of life in your own way. Edmund Rice people believe that if we allow exclusion and discomfort with others to dictate who we call our neighbour, our humanity, our own humanity, will always be impaired and incomplete. Most of us are taught from a young age that God and the words and the wonderful expressions we have for that divine reality is expressed best through the words and through the values of love and compassion. Every word we use to talk about God or the divine is incomplete and falls short. But I think most of us can get a hold of love, compassion, and we see that that points to that wonderful essence of which we belong. Mission, then, is the outpouring of God's love and compassion and justice from God to the world. Our role, and the role of all people involved in working as a result of this sense that we share this common humanity, is to embody this divine love, compassion, and justice. We are vehicles for the presence and the generosity of God in the world. So Edmund Rice people strive to see the world through eyes and hearts of love, compassion, inclusion, and justice. In the same way that Jesus and the other sages and prophets of all of our great faiths have done, we too are called to reveal to the world this God, this divine essence of love and compassion enshrined in our hearts. I sometimes tell the story of a grandma, and this story is true. It may never have happened, but it's still true. I think we understand this. This grandma was in a toy store, and she was buying some toys for her grandchildren. And while she was in the toy store, she looked out the window of the store and she saw the face of a little girl. This little girl was very poor, and she was looking longingly inside at the toys. Now, the grandmother was moved with love and compassion, and she said to the little girl, come inside. I want you to choose a toy and I'll purchase it for you. And the little girl comes in with a big smile on her face, and she chooses a little doll. And as they're walking to the counter to pay for the doll, the little girl with a big smile on her face looks up at the grandma and she says, "Are you God?" Now, the grandma was quite embarrassed and moved at the same time. She said, "Oh, no, no, darling, I'm not God." The little girl didn't let up. She looked up one more time and she said, "Well, who are you then?" And the grandma said, "I'd better think quickly." And she said, "I'm a child of God." And the little girl, once again with a big smile on her face, looks up at the grandma and says, "Yes, I could tell that there was a connection. Now, the moral of that story is very simple. It's very simple. When people come into our lives, do they see this divine connection in us? Edmund Rice people believe that we are created from love, by love, to love. Our life's mission and purpose, and that of our organizations and those we lead and those we govern, is to be the loving, compassionate, just, and inclusive face of the divine for the people with whom we work. We're told that Edmund Rice experienced God appealing to him in the poor and the marginalized of his place, Ireland, and that this invoked in him a conversion of heart. Conversion of heart doesn't mean that we have to change or reject our religion, go to another type of religious system. It's about accepting the responsibility for bringing the reality of God's vision into the world. This sense of being in tune with the divine plan for the world and making the world a better place. Conversion of heart is a commitment to see with the eyes of God. Edmund Rice recognized that the God of love, compassion, and justice promises fullness of life for all, not just a lucky or a chosen few. He saw that living in an inhuman situation of poverty and exclusion, disposable and forgotten in the eyes of the world, is contrary to God's will. So our voice in Edmund Rice's mission must amplify the voice of those who are poor and forgotten in our world, those for whom survival is a constant challenge, those who lack the basic resources to live a dignified life, the victims of structures and decisions which exclude and oppress them. Interestingly, after his wife's death, Edmund contemplated joining a monastery. However, he came to realize that we recognize, we serve, and we worship God most completely in our service to the poor. We see the face of God most clearly in the poor. Ignoring the poor means that we potentially ignore God. So mission in the tradition of Edmund Rice is not simply a call for generous action to alleviate misery, but it's a demand for the building of a more just social order. Mission in the tradition of Edmund Rice takes sides and asks disturbing questions about why things are the way they are. And the greatest risk for our Edmund Rice organisations is to drift from the core imperatives of our mission and to embrace a tame and domesticated mission. Edmund Rice organisations must make bold claims about the future of the world, about justice, about the way that we should relate to one another, about the true meaning of freedom and purpose. And Edmund Rice people will speak for the voiceless and those who are excluded. Now, we're all leaders in this Edmund Rice movement. I'd like to say just a couple of things about leadership. Most of us have a title of some description. We see it written on our little profiles on the Zoom presentation. There's nothing wrong with titles. I've had a few of them in my day. But here's the thing. We shouldn't rely on a title. All a title will get us is a little bit of time. People will see through us if we just rely on titles. The shallowest form of leadership relies on titles. So leadership's not about status, position, hierarchy, and titles. It's about one life influencing another. True leadership is not appointed or bestowed. It's recognized through character, integrity, vision, and action. Respect and influence are not claimed. They're earned through consistent behavior and commitment to other people. So Edmund Rice leaders do not seek personal acclaim. They work to transform vision into reality for the sake of the common good. They create environments where people feel valued, empowered, and capable of reaching their full potential. American priest Theodore Hesburgh once said, "The essence of leadership is that you must have a vision." He said, "You can't blow an uncertain trumpet." Now, I'm not a great musician, but can you imagine blowing an uncertain trumpet? It would sound pretty horrible. Leaders must know what they stand for and align themselves with the highest aspirations of their communities. So the first task of an Edmund Rice leader is to envision the world that we would like to leave behind. As leaders in the Edmund Rice tradition, we're called to be bold in advocating for justice, in fostering meaningful relationships, and standing with those who have no voice. Leadership is about inspiration. President John Quincy Adams put it simply. He said, "If your actions inspire others to dream more, to learn more, do more, and become more, you are a leader." Martin Luther King Jr. began his most famous speech with, "I have a dream." Notice he didn't say, "I have a strategic plan." Now, strategic plans are really important, but what matters most is the dream. Leadership requires the vision, the courage, and the ability to inspire others to dream alongside of us. And at the core of every great leader is a spirit of service, one that arises not from obligation, but from love and compassion. So the Edmund Rice leader does not see power as a means to command, but an opportunity to uplift. It's not about status, but about serving other people, rooted in humility, compassion, and selflessness. Folks, I know that you're governors, and many of you have a very strong background, I imagine, in the skills of governance. And what I'm about to say is not to downplay that at all. I've worked with governors basically all of my professional life, certainly all of the times I've had the opportunity to be in leadership. And I realize it is so important that we have qualified, capable, and gifted people to be able to steward our organizations and those who work in our organizations along the way, because it is a very complicated legal and fiduciary environment in which our organizations exist today. But there's a danger in this movement to professionalize. So the role of governors, as I see it, in the Edmund Rice tradition, is not simply about risk, compliance, and fiduciary responsibilities. As important and essential as these things are, This is the great danger. The vision can be lost, priorities can change, and mission can become domesticated if our governors are not formed in mission, if our governors do not see their work as more than just an opportunity to have their name on a board or gain their different hours in Australia. There's a whole lot of people now who gain hours on different boards so that they can move up to other boards, etc., etc. And sadly, I feel that some of our Edmund Rice boards have attracted these people from time to time. They're great people, but I'm not sure whether they have the heart or they come into it with the heart. I'm not saying we give up on them. I'm saying that what is as important, more important than those skills that people might bring as lawyers, accountants, and whatever they do, is this sense that they have to see themselves as leaders. All of the things that we've spoken about so far this evening have to be their stuff as well. It can't just be left to the mission people or the executive people or the people who do the kind of pointy end stuff. Everyone in the organization has to understand that their formation as Edmund Rice leaders is important and must guide what they do on a day-to-day basis. And we have this sense of professionalism, and the opposite of professionalism is amateur. Now, in Australia and probably in India too, amateurs can be a pejorative term, right? You can put someone down. You're not very professional. That was a very amateur attempt, right? Now, if we come back to the roots of what the word amateur means, it comes from the Latin amar, to love what you do, right? So what I would suggest is that we as leaders and governors need to be both professionals and amateurs. And we need to be involved in what we do because we love what we do. We love the sense that we can make a difference in the world, as well as make differences on balance sheets and all sorts of things. So my plea to governors everywhere is that we understand that we are all involved in leadership, and our organizations and our schools will all be stronger if our governors feel this sense of mission very strongly. And I'm sure that in your organization, I'm preaching to the converted 100%, right? Right? Because I know of the great commitment that you make. I know of the wonderful work that you do. And I know of the great support that Steve receives, right? And the staff receive. But I think we have to have our minds focused always on the mission. And yes, be professional, be all the things that we need to be in the world, but mission must guide us and must make us tick. So, Steve, that might do me, mate. I preached for far too long. I'm sorry that I've given you a bit of an earful, folks, but it's been a great privilege to have this opportunity. So I hope something of what I said makes a bit of sense.
Thank you, Wayne, for that. I think it was good that we revisited our origins and the purpose of our being here together. Incidentally, Pratik is an acronym for Presence and Right Relations for Advocacy and Training of the Young in Earth Rights and Kids' Rights. So the first two words are actually been borrowed from the brothers' core values. Presence. So instead of compassion, we're using the word right relations, which is how we do our mission. And the other words at the end are all about our ministry, our mission to liberation. So thank you for bringing us back to that core as well. So I'm going to now leave the floor open to anyone who wants to ask Wayne any questions about anything with regards to governance or the spirit of governance or anything you'd like to ask him. Over to you.
And there was silence.
I think people are just absorbing what you've said, and we will get a question or two coming through.
It doesn't matter. Um, people have their own processes to go through, and so it's just a great privilege for me to see all these faces. I know of the great work that you do, and I know of the great commitment you have. And I feel like a bit of an imposter speaking this stuff to you because you guys live it.
Actually, if I can ask a question to Kon and Parag, who are here as Christian brothers right now. Uh, you recently had a chapter in two phases, I think. What's the chapter could say to us as lay people right now and this particular organization? What do you think is the wisdom that we could glean from what you experienced the chapter?
Well, Steve, could I
Yes, yes, please.
just hi Wayne, thanks for your talk.
Hi,
Sorry,
Conrad, how are you? Good to see you, mate.
good seeing you. I missed the end where my power went off out here. Anyway, yeah, just to answer Steve's question now, there's something similar in what Wayne said was the connection with people, beginning with connecting with each other, and then we go to connecting with my own self. So beginning with self, then with the community of brothers, and then widening the connection right down to creation. So that's what I found for one. And then to keep reflecting on a regular basis, not just like what we had now, an assembly, which will now, it's a once in a 6-year term, like, where you are reminded or through chapter documents reminded to connect. And then we sort of drift and then come back at the next. So keep the connectivity going on a regular basis. It involves being in touch with God, with ourselves through prayer, I suppose. Yeah.
Thanks,
Thanks,
Kon.
Con.
Wayne or Parag, would you like to add to that? So Wayne, the question to you, in your experience as probably leader of many organizations and part of many boards, what practices do people follow to keep the original spirit and the vision alive as good healthy practices for us even as a board? What maintains and helps people keep that visioning together? And with regards to formation, I know in Australia you have identity leaders set in place to keep them focused on the identity of the Edmund Rice ethos. So what are
Yeah.
healthy practices that you have that you could suggest to us to keep ourselves nurtured uh,
Yeah.
and focused on the vision?
Yeah. In terms of our boards, initially when people, there needs to be fairly honest conversations with people when they come on our boards around, what are the core priorities for the organization or the group that they're going to be part of the leadership of. And so we would have a selection process for people who would come, so that we would make sure that people who nominated for our boards who were chosen to be part of our boards hopefully would display a readiness or an openness. They don't have to be like the finished product, but you would want someone who is open to formation, someone who is prepared to put in some extra time to understand the mission of Edmund Rice, and so people who would see that coming onto our boards would be part of their spiritual formation, their spiritual journey, and so it would be a nurturing and a life-giving experience for them. We in Australia, well, when I was involved in Edmund Rice education in Australia, we asked our board members, if possible, would they do immersion experiences? Many visited India, for example. Many visited the work with our Indigenous people here in Australia. Some people went to South America and Africa and other places. This was the board that I belonged to. This was the National Board of Edmund Rice. Now, you know, I love the prayer that we began with today, because sometimes prayer in my context can just be a kind of a how would you say? It's almost an attention-getting process. You start with a prayer and it kind of gets people on the same wavelength. What I enjoyed about that prayer was it was a nurturing thing for everyone here. And so intentionally on our board, we would take time for prayer and retreat. So, you know, once every year, we would suspend the normal business of our meetings so that we could have a period of retreat, and depending on people's availability and timing, but it would be something that people would look forward to, and not feel like that they have to participate. And so it comes down to that formation side, Steve, that sense that within our means and our possibilities to make sure that we have the opportunity to be nurtured ourselves, but also be nurtured in our understanding of the mission of the organization. This is the gap in many ways. We can have wonderful programs for our own personal spirituality, which, you know, by nature are multifaceted and varied, and that makes us all so interesting. But when we come together as a board, or we come together as a group of leaders, we have to take some time and have some process for initiating people into and nurturing people in this ongoing sense of what are the core priorities for the group that we lead and serve, and how do I contribute my gifts and talents more towards the ends that are going to affect, if it's a school, the students in the school, if it's a work of project, you know, the young people who'll be uplifted through the work that you do. How do I see my contribution, as humble as it might be, bearing fruit with the noblest aims of what we're trying to do? And if we can't get people, if we don't give people that kind of link, you know, we can lose them. I always say that in a school, it doesn't matter what your role is, whether you're the principal, whether you're a teacher, whether you're the guy who sweeps the yard. You need to be able to see your contribution as adding to the work that education will do for the young people in the school. That's the way you get people involved through the heart. That's the way they start to see the world. You know, they look at the world with human eyes, but they see the world through divine eyes.
Thank you, Wayne.